And that's where it's your ship came from. I used to say to my sailors, it's your ship. If you see something that needs to be done, step up to the plate and take action. And at the beginning, the sailors wanted me to make all the decisions. And they would come to me and ask how to do something. And I would say, what do you think? To me, those are the four most powerful words in the English language. What do you think? And when they're asked to come up with their own solution, then they will take ownership for the results. And what we were creating previously was order takers, whereby we tell them what to do and how to do it. And if things don't work out, their answer was, I was just following orders. Well, to get to a higher level of performance, you got to get rid of the order takers and get people who are engaged in and take ownership for the results.
Today's guest on the Keynote Curators podcast is Michael Abrashoff. He is the former commander of the USS Benfold and the best-selling author of It's Your Ship. His story is nothing short of extraordinary. Mike was the most junior officer in the Pacific Fleet when he took command of the USS Benfold, which was the near worst performing ship in the US Navy. 12 months later, his ship was the best ship in the entire Navy, using the same crew with the same resources. In our conversation, we're going to uncover Mike's methodology and his manner of leadership and communication that enabled him to produce the extraordinary results in such a short period of time. This is a conversation you're not going to want to miss if you're interested in retaining, training, and developing your team at work. You're going to be smarter for listening. We appreciate you joining in, and thank you for being here. Welcome to today's version of Curated Insights with Seth Dechtman. Our special guest is Mike Abrashoff. Mike, welcome to today's show.
Seth, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. Do I have permission to speak freely?
Permission granted, and permission to come aboard. Did I not say that right?
Permission, did I not say that accurately?
Permission to speak freely, yes.
Permission to speak freely. So, Mike, I've booked you for some of my best clients, and I've seen you in person a handful of times, and every time you hit a home run. And I know that the book is now, is it true that it's nearly 20 years old?
It's about 19 years old.
Okay.
19 and a half, you're right.
19 and a half and over 1 million copies sold. There are a lot of lessons in the book. I mean, Harvard Business Review jumped on board. Every client I've worked with that I've brought you in to speak with has brought hundreds of copies and purchased hundreds of copies. And the title is just a fantastic title. And for somebody who graduated in the top 80% of their class, it's surprising that you got a book out of you. I think you refer to your mother making some kind of joke about that. But I want to, in all seriousness, Mike, 19-year-old book, over 1 million copies sold, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of speeches that you've given, literally hundreds of speeches, if not over 1,000 speeches, I'm sure. What are some of the universal things that surprise you about the lessons you impart in the book that are still relevant today? And if you could contextualize it in the Great Resignation, the hybrid workforce, and those kind of ideas.
So Seth was captain of the ship 21 years ago, and we make culture out to be too darn difficult. To me, it's, would you want your son or daughter to come work for you and see you in action every day? And if you're proud, you're on the right track. If you're embarrassed, fix it. And all I did was try to fix everything I was embarrassed about, including our attrition rate. And, we're talking about the Great Resignation today. When I took command of the ship, our retention rate was 8%, meaning we were retaining 8% of the sailors eligible to reenlist. And I did exit surveys as sailors were leaving to find out why they were leaving, because everybody said, Mike, they're leaving because of our low pay, and you can't do anything about it.
And who was that? Who was that everybody, Mike?
My chain of command, the admirals, said you can't do anything about it. And the exit surveys came back, and pay was important, but it was only number 5 on the list of reasons why people were leaving. And number 1 was they didn't feel like they were being treated with respect in the workplace. And number 2, they didn't feel like they were being listened to. Number 3, they didn't feel like they were being groomed for increased positions of responsibility. And number 4, they didn't feel like they were getting the training they needed. And lo and behold, we're in the Great Resignation. McKinsey comes out with a study last month. Top 5 reasons why people leave their organization. It's the exact same top 5 reasons that I was faced with 21 years ago. And I'm sorry, but this isn't rocket science.
Right. Surprise.
Right. And now people are waking up. maybe we do need to treat our people with respect and create a climate of engagement where they feel like they're part of the team and where like they're valued and listened to. And that's all we did on the ship. And we went from one of the worst performers to getting awarded the Spokane Trophy, which was an award started in 1908 by President Theodore Roosevelt and given annually to the best ship in the Pacific Fleet.
Yeah, the performance indicators of the turnaround is just extraordinary. Correct me if I'm wrong, it would cover safety, maintenance, readiness, target practice, fuel use. I mean, every indicator across the board, you improved in a transformational manner.
And we became the leader in our industry while saving 25% of our operating budget. And we went from an 8% retention rate to almost 100%. And if you ask me, why we could deliver that performance, the team stayed intact. We grew comfortable with each other. They felt engaged and they started to collaborate across the 5 departments. And that is a timeless lesson for anybody running a business or an organization today. And I think that's why It's Your Ship has continued to sell as well as it has. It's because these lessons are timeless. And no matter what business you happen to be in today, at the end of the day, we're in the people business. And guess what? We're short 9 million workers in this country. So if we want to fall behind, have our people leave us. But if you want to stay and thrive, you figure out a way to engage your people so that they stay with you longer.
Right.
And my officers had a term for it that we used to recruit our people each and every day, even though we already had them on board.
Right. I mean, that's a retention methodology. The people that you see every day are the ones that you're going to rehire or promote or develop within. It sounds to me, I'm just going to reduce it down to the most digestible nugget here, but it seems like your chain of command was saying, well, we're resigned, basically. We're a little bit even cynical. Pay, and there's nothing you can do about it. I know you talk in the book about the resources and some of the things that you can't control, which is the budget. But you found that culture beats pay.
And ownership creates a sense of accountability and results. And that's where It's Your Ship came from. I used to say to my sailors, it's your ship. If you see something that needs to be done, step up to the plate and take action. And at the beginning, the sailors wanted me to make all the decisions. And they would come to me and ask how to do something. And I would say, what do you think? To me, those are the 4 most powerful words in the English language. What do you think? And when they're asked to come up with their own solution, then they will take ownership for the results. And what we were creating previously was order takers, whereby we tell them what to do and how to do it. And if things don't work out, their answer was, I was just following orders. Well, to get to a higher level of performance, you got to get rid of the order takers and get people who are engaged in and take ownership for the results.
Right. I'm chuckling a little bit because I tell my children, it's your house. I didn't throw that piece of paper on the kitchen floor. It doesn't matter. It's your house. Pick it up. And what I found is we do what's called the general house cleanup, where everybody has to go out into the yard and pick up a certain amount of trash or things that need to be replaced back in. And we try to make a game out of it, that they're by very young kids, but it is the whole context of taking ownership and being responsible and pride in your work. And every now and then I see the little spark come out where they jump out and take some ownership. And without me saying, kind of a command control, bark the order and go do it, that they on their own, it's starting to seep in. So
now when they start comparing their friends' houses to your house and how they have lower standards, that's when you've made progress, is when they compare their own house to their friends' houses and that theirs is better. And
go ahead. No, would it be a little bit manipulative if I prompted that and I said, well, what's it like over at, Sarah's house?
They don't care the way we do. So Benfold was dirty when I took command. And when I walked down the passageway, if I saw trash, I'd bend over and pick it up. And in the Navy, the captain doesn't pick up trash, but if you walk past something that's not right and make no effort to fix it, that means you approve of it. And so what happened was sailors started seeing me pick up trash in their workspace. They stopped putting it there. They started taking greater pride in their work environment, and it later trans into greater pride in themselves, and you get better performance.
Yeah, and and culture. I'll just reiterate it. Culture beats pay. People are cared about. I love the line. If you could elaborate a little bit, you asked, one of your crew members, "Why are you leaving?" And he said, I could be paraphrasing here. Nobody asked me to stay.
It's exactly right. Nobody ever asked me to stay. And then it hit me. I can do this. I can
Right,
ask them to stay.
right.
But you don't wait until their contract is up to ask them to stay. And so we implemented a policy 9 months prior to a sailor's contract end date. Bring them up to my office. Are you thinking about staying in? Or are you going to get out? And if you're thinking about getting out, what is it that we could do now to help you change your mind? And what I heard from sailors was, gee, if you get me education or this training program or put me in a different job classification, I'll stay. And it cost $80,000 to recruit one person into the
Wow.
U.S. Navy and get him or her through the first 8 weeks of boot camp. And we can't spend $3,500 on a training program that would get them to re-enlist. It's
Right.
madness. And so
I
if you
mean,
give me 9 months to solve a problem, I can do it. But if somebody comes and tells you they're leaving, they didn't make that decision that morning. They made it 4 or 5 months ago,
oh yeah.
and they got their ducks lined up. So the key is to intervene before they get to that point and find out what would it take to keep them. And it's cheaper to keep the people you already have than to lose them and have to go out and find and train replacements.
Yeah, and that answer that your crew member said, nobody asked me to stay. I mean, nobody asked me to stay. I don't know, 5 or 6 words, but that is a world there. Nobody showed interest, nobody showed care, nobody showed concern, nobody advocated, nobody acknowledged. It was literally just like a sack of flesh and
Right, I'm a
bones. What?
number. I'm a
Yeah,
number that I'll be disposed of,
right.
and I wanted them to know that we care about you, and I care about your career just as much as I care about my own. And if they see me caring about them as people in their careers, they become more loyal and dedicated and committed to you.
Yeah, and we can't forget. And look, you you were the commanding officer. It's possible that you go to war, that you enter into combat. you know, so everybody's got to be unified and together, and on the same page and taking ownership. I mean, that's a real possibility.
It is, and that's what drove me every day, was never having to write the parents of any of my sailors telling them that their sons or daughters weren't coming home because we didn't give it our best. And when people feel ownership and accountability, discipline improves. And so that if we do ever get called into combat, we're going to have a disciplined crew of people who will do what's required and what's expected, when we're under attack. And if people don't take ownership, then what you create are chaos and anarchy. And when that first shot gets fired, nobody knows what to do.
I don't want to beat the dead horse here, but I recall one anecdote that really spoke to me about how you empowered the crew and the phrase, "What do you think?" So I want to keep going on this idea of the war for talent, to use the metaphor of the armed services, the war for talent. And could you go a little bit deeper on, we're in this great resignation. So not only are there a lot of jobs out there that need to be filled, but people are leaving the jobs that they're in. And we're in the context of a changing workforce, hybrid workforce, flexible workforce, call it what you want, work from home part of the time, work in the office. And people are rethinking everything about their lives, their careers, their path of what they want to do with, the next step of their profession. And I know that you had your eye on retention and dealing with who you have right in front of you. And as the employer, what could you impart to employers today in this context of a very quick changing workforce with all sorts of variables? People are resigning, people want to look for something different. And then for the employee.
So I interviewed every sailor on the ship individually, all 310 of them. And I solicited their ideas of how we could make things better on the ship. And one sailor said, we're based in San Diego, cost of living is sky high. And I had sailors who could not afford to live in San Diego because it was so expensive. I had sailors living in Tijuana. I had sailors living in San Bernardino, 2 hours away.
Wow.
And they would spend, their morning and their evening and stuck in rush hour, wasting gasoline, wasting money. And our work hours were from 7:30 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon with an hour for lunch. And one sailor said, why don't we start work at 6, work through lunch, and leave at 1? I get the same number of work hours, but not only that, in the Navy, productivity drops off dramatically after lunch. It's just a given that you get more productivity per hour in the morning than you do in the afternoon.
Right.
So I'm here thinking, I get more productivity, and by and large, sailors are going to leave the ship at 1 and not hang around for lunch. And I've got to feed them. So if I'm not feeding as many mouths, I save money in the food budget. And it's like, what's not to like about this recommendation? Everybody was crazy about it, except for one sailor, John 𝘱𝑒𝐿𝐶. John lived in Escondido, and he and his wife could only afford one car, and she needed it for work. And he took the trolley every morning from Escondido to the naval station. And the trolley didn't run that early in the morning, and he couldn't get to work by 6, but he could get to work by 7. And so he put in a request to come at 7 and he'd work till 2. Everybody in his change of command turned it down because we've never done it that way before. And it lands on my desk and I'm here thinking, I get it. I can understand that somebody's family can impact the change in the work environment. And so I granted his request against the advice of his whole chain of command. John 𝘱𝑒𝐿𝐶 ended up working till 3, 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, because he was so grateful that we allowed a hybrid, flexible work schedule for him.
Right.
So he was a communicator. And we get to the Middle East. And this was back in the early days of the internet in the Wild West and 56 kilobit dial-up.
Right.
And it was the same for the Navy. The Navy had never increased the bandwidth for our communications. And as a result, the whole system broke down because we didn't have the bandwidth. John 𝘱𝑒𝐿𝐶, 25 years old, a second-class petty officer, on his own, studied the satellite architecture over the Middle East, and he found a satellite that was used exclusively for the employment of Tomahawk cruise missiles, and that only 10% of the bandwidth was being used. And his recommendation was, if we just move this over to this satellite, it'll solve the problem. I passed it up the chain of command. The fleet commander makes the change, and it solved the problem instantaneously.
Wow.
And the satellite architecture is such a big deal that the Chief of Naval Operations impaneled a 10-admiral workforce to design the architecture of what we should be planning for in the future. They asked me to come present. I took John 𝘱𝑒𝐿𝐶. It was his idea.
Sure.
I put John 𝘱𝑒𝐿𝐶 up in front of 10 admirals, and their jaws dropped open of what he told them, of what they needed to be thinking about. And it was like nobody had been honest with them except John 𝘱𝑒𝐿𝐶. So anyway, his tour on Benfold is up. The Navy nominates him to be the communications expert for the President of the United States, and John 𝘱𝑒𝐿𝐶 gets selected. So for the next 6 years, John 𝘱𝑒𝐿𝐶 patched the communications for the President of the United States. And it all came because we had a flexible hybrid work environment where if I had said no, his wife would have forced him to get out of the Navy. But instead, because we said yes, he became more committed, and we had a culture of being intellectually curious. He came up with a solution, and look where he is. And so it's an utter surprise to me that we're even having this conversation, because every person has different needs. COVID has thrown us for a loop. And the problem of our generation is aging parents. How do you take care of aging parents while you have to get your kids educated via Zoom sometimes?
That's right.
And to have an inflexible policy is going to drive our people out. And so I knew every sailor's name, their spouse's name, their children's name, their hometown, and I knew what was going on in their lives. And so I could design a program for each person to get them to feel like I care about them and they stay with you.
Right. And I mean, I don't know how much of a risk it was, even though you granted the request, you had to go over the head of his chain of command, but that was a risk you were willing to take.
It was.
Yeah.
I always do the right thing. If somebody gets their nose out of joint, we'll get over it. Nobody got killed or injured, but I'm going to strive to do the right thing for our people.
Right. And, I think a couple of things you said. First of all, you were flexible, and your flexibility then, spreads out. And I would say not only intellectually curious, but there was a real creativity to the solution that he came up with. I mean, that's design thinking there. And maybe if he didn't have the context of your flexibility, granting the request, freeing himself up to be fully self-expressed, that maybe that solution, it may have, but it might not have come forth.
Correct. He felt comfortable surfacing it up the chain of command to me. And if he didn't feel comfortable, he would have never gone the extra mile.
Right. And that, that's one of the things I got from your book is the focus on the crew. And it's no different. I have a small team. We have a team of 4. Some are freelancers. It's a very hybrid workforce. I'm talking to you today from Buenos Aires, Argentina. The person who will be producing this in post-production is in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I have somebody in Naples, Italy, who actually, her husband works for the admiral there and on the base there in the Mediterranean. And we have one standing meeting a week. And the rest is, when there are deadlines, they're hard and fast. But otherwise, get the work done according to your schedule, as long as it gets complete and it's thorough and, and we have our system of communication. So I took out of the book, focusing on the crew, what are their needs, what's important to them, and, and learning where their interests are and where they want to expand their capacities. Would you share a little bit? Are you surprised with the thousands of speeches you've given that you still run into successful companies that might even be considered leaders in their industry that don't focus, using the metaphor, focusing on their crew?
Seth, it's interesting. I did an analysis of who hires me, and you would think it's the worst companies trying to get better. The people that hire me are the great companies trying to get even greater. And so time after time, it's intellectually curious companies are the ones that bring me in and bring me back repeatedly because they're trying to find that next edge to get them to the next level.
Right. Because, you would think if I were presenting you, promoting you, and I said, there's a company that there's a merger and an acquisition, or there's been a lot of executive turnover and they're interested in a turnaround story, right? That would kind of be a hand in glove. But I think that what you just said is the companies that invest in education and are interested in exposing their crew to new ideas and being these lifelong educators are the ones that are going to appeal to this kind of message.
Correct. And one of the toughest problems for leaders today is how do you find the time to mentor young people and those high potentials? And it's a tough issue because everybody's doing the work of 2 or 3 people today, and it's tough to find the time. Well, when I was the number 2 assistant to the Secretary of Defense, I wasn't in a leadership position. I was an individual contributor. And my job was to push paper all day long. Every day, a 4-foot stack of paper would come in, and it was my job to highlight what I thought was important for the Secretary of Defense to read. And I'd get this 4-foot stack of paper down to maybe 8 or 9 inches. And between me and the secretary is the senior military assistant. It's probably our most important 3-star job in the military today. Colin Powell had the job as a 3-star. Admiral McRaven, the guy who captured bin Laden, had the job as a 3-star. And I would put my 8 or 9 inches of paper in his in basket. And at the beginning, he threw 90% of what I thought was important away and only sent on maybe 10% of it.
Wow.
And he never had time to coach me or mentor me on what I should be looking for. And as a result, I was demoralized and I wasn't getting any better. He didn't have time to mentor me and I was flailing and I thought about quitting. And then one day I thought, before I quit, I'm going to try to train myself to think like him. So every night at 8:30 when he went home from work, I would go into his office, and it's called a burn bag where you put classified material for destruction.
Right.
I would take his burn bag and I'd dump it out on his desk. And I'd compare everything of mine that he threw away and compared it to what he sent on to the secretary. And what I tried to do was to train myself to think like my boss. And by doing that, I got my 8 or 9 inches of paper down to maybe 1 or 2 inches. And I'd sit there and I'd watch him work and he would just rubber stamp it and send it right on to the secretary.
Wow.
So I went from like a 10% effectiveness rating to maybe 95%. And I loved it.
Yeah.
And I started playing a game in meetings. They never asked me for my opinion. I sat in the back row. But before they would make a decision, I would say to myself, if I'm the 3-star or if I'm the Secretary of Defense, based on what's been presented, what decision would I make? And if I made the same decision that they made, then it was, I can think like a 3-star.
Wow.
If they made a different decision, it was, there's a gap in my training I needed to go fill. And it allowed me to anticipate what needed to be done in the office before they ever asked for it. And I'd be there with a solution. And the general started to trust me. And he started to delegate some of his lesser important responsibilities to me. He put me in charge of the SecDev security detail, the trip planning team, the communications team. I had 45 people reporting to me in what was traditionally an independent individual contributor position. And he never, to this day, he's never given me any feedback. And who I got it from was his wife. She came into the office one day and she came back to my desk and she said, I want to thank you for everything you're doing for Paul, because for the first time since he's had this job, he comes home at night happy.
Wow.
And for those employees out there who are looking to climb that ladder of success, what you need to do is to train yourself to think like your boss. And what's going to get you those increased positions of leadership and responsibility is the ability to anticipate what needs to be done and then lead greater numbers of people to provide the solution. And that's how you get noticed. And that's how you climb the ladder of success. And you can't use the excuse, they don't have time to mentor me. Mentor yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the responsibility that I took on myself, and that every worker out there who wants to climb the ladder, this is what you need to do.
Great lesson. That was fantastic. I mean, the honesty, you were like, I was thinking of quitting. And the methodology of going to the burn bag and kind of making an analysis, that's fantastic. It's important. It's good critical thinking. But underneath that is a mindset that what has you say, was it pre-Naval Academy? Was it that you grew up in centralish Pennsylvania in the house that you had? What was it that was that spark that had you generate or initiate, I'm not going to quit, I'm going to mentor myself, or I'm going to take it on myself? Because that's a source that is distinct from a methodology or a deployment of some type of practical habit.
Well, I'm one of 7 kids. I'm 6 of 7. And we had a very competitive household growing up. And it wasn't that the household was growing up, it was competitive. The schools we went to always compared us against each other. And I went to Catholic schools and the nuns would say, oh, you're not as smart as your sisters. And so, the nuns were always putting us down for not being as smart as somebody else. So I think that caused me to be a little bit more competitive.
Sure.
And I honed that as I came up through the ranks to make sure it was a healthy competition.
Right.
Because there can be destructive competition out there.
Right.
So I think it's a desire, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to try to be the best at it. And in the publishing world, my publisher told me that I'm considered the hardest working author in the business because there was no advertising behind my book. I had to do it all on my own.
Right.
And I've now sold over 1.2 million copies.
Yeah.
And I've heard from in the industry, the speaking industry, that I'm considered one of the hardest working speakers out there because I will get on a plane at a moment's notice if somebody needs me.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I would advise young people coming up through the ranks is to worry about your professional reputation. And it was something William Perry told me my last day working for him. And that is that the easiest word in the English language to say is no. But if you develop a professional reputation where the first word out of your mouth is no, nobody will want to work with you and no employer will want to have you. And so if you develop a professional reputation where you will find a way to get to yes, that's who people want to work with. And so I've done my darndest to be the hardest worker, that people know, that your clients know that I will do my research,
right,
show up and give them the presentation that they need to get to that next higher level.
Right. And I think the distinction there is, if I can just put a bow on it, is it's not willy-nilly say yes, but when you do say yes, you're putting all your energy and your creativity and your resources behind it to get it done. And those are the kind of people that, you're saying people want to hire, people want to be around, and people want to follow.
And finding a way to get to yes means that you don't necessarily give everybody 100% of what they're looking for, but find out what matters most to them and then figure out a way to deliver that. And it could be 60% of what they're looking for, but if they feel like they're getting a good deal and you approach it in a positive manner, then that's who they'll bring back time and time again.
Right. And again, like you said, it's not rocket science, but if you're a no right away, the energy that it puts out, it's like, God, maybe it is a no, but give it a consideration. You know, I want to take the William Perry, you mentioned his name, and I know the story where they sent you kind of as a third body for the interview for USS Benfold. Is that right? Could you distinguish in a curated insight for us what you think the source of, you know, you being chosen, where you were basically sent as like a filler, if you will?
So I'm going to tell a story that I've never told before. I was nominated to be many years before that, to be the military assistant to the Vice President of the United States. And I go for my interview and I didn't get the job. And I lost out to a guy who had a PhD because they were enamored with somebody who has a PhD. And you know what? I don't have one. I'm never going to have one.
Right.
But I get nominated to be the military assistant to the Secretary of Defense about 8 years later. And I show up the same way I interviewed with the Vice President. But all four services were asked to provide 3 nominees. And the admiral that told me I was in the package said that I wasn't the Navy's top pick and that they didn't expect me to get the job. But if I get an interview, just don't embarrass them. So I wasn't the Navy's #1 expectation to get the job. And I ended up with the job. I beat out 11 other people who were smarter than me and who had better records than I did. And it took me a year to get up the courage to ask the Secretary of Defense why he hired me. And he said, Mike, I didn't hire you. He said, the staff did. He said, I've been in business and government for over 40 years. And he said, I can hire the smartest people. That's never been a marker for my success. What has been is whenever I've been able to create a team of people who will support each other and collaborate with each other. And bust a gut to help me get the mission accomplished. He said, that's why I'm successful. He said, out of the 12 candidates, you were the only one who took the time to talk to them as if they were people, and how if you got selected, how you would support them so that they could support me better. And when I asked the staff who they wanted to work with, they said they wanted to work with you. And I'm smiling because it just hit me. The Vice President who rejected me did not have a PhD. And the Secretary of Defense, who had a PhD in mathematics, is the one who took me. And that's a chuckle I've never put together till now.
Wow, that's a yin yang kind of bookend.
It is, isn't
there?
It?
Yeah,
so,
that's really...
to those aspiring leaders out there who want to climb that ladder of success, ask yourself: are you the shipmate that your fellow crew members would choose to have them on the team? And if they would, then you're on the right track.
Beautiful, beautiful. I am going to go completely out, beyond left field, beyond right field, past the bullpen, outside the parking lot. Did you see the movie Greyhound?
I did not.
Okay, I highly recommend it.
Okay.
True story. Do you know the story of it at all?
I do not.
Okay. Tom Hanks is the lead, and forgive me if I'm hacking ranks. I think he's the commander of a battleship. Is that accurate? Would you, if you
could be.
Okay. And it was part of the convoys that were accompanying a lot of the supply chain to Europe during World War II.
Okay.
So I'm thinking way up, I don't know, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Iceland, you know, all that. And all of the the Nazi submarines, and that whole kind of cat and mouse game of getting the supplies across, and the Germans, you know, kind of trying to outmaneuver and sink ships. And it's it just crossed my mind. Watch it. I think it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime or one of them. Watch it. You know, nothing to do with our conversation right now, but
well, maybe we should hire Tom Hanks to unscrew the ports out in Los Angeles and Long Beach so that we can get all those containers off those container ships.
Yeah. And then while he's out there, we could have a casting where he could play you in the movie version of It's Your Ship.
I've been offered before to have a movie made, but there was no drugs involved, and it you know, business isn't sexy. It's just executing better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And we weren't flashy. We weren't arrogant. As a matter of fact, I try to come across with a sense of humility, but business is about executing on the simple things better than anybody else. And if you can do that, you'll be a success.
If you'd like to learn more about this speaker, visit our website at thekeynotecurators.com. There, you'll find dozens of videos of speakers that are a perfect fit for your event. If you'd like to reach out directly, please click on the link below in the description. My name is Seth Dechtman, and you've been watching Curated Insights.